We have to allow ourselves to trust this overall process of growth that we're in.
Welcome to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. I'm very glad to air the second half of a conversation that I'm having with Ted Witzig Jr. on the topic of identity formation. So what I hear then is that patience is required in identity work.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that happens too is we have to have patience for ourselves. Sometimes we have to have patience for the people we're observing in this. You know, when you're the parent and you're watching your 15-year-old or you're watching your 22-year-old or you're watching your newly married adult child in their role, they're wobbly, okay? And it doesn't mean they're in a bad place. It can mean sometimes people are in bad places, but sometimes it's just they've got wobbly legs.
Okay. I want you to speak to the condition. We mentioned exploration leading to commitment.
Yeah.
Okay? Because I think when you talk about that kid space, there are some kids that seemingly move into commitment quick and easy.
Yeah.
And other kids that don't get to commitment quick and easy. It comes through pain, sometimes heartache.
Yeah.
But what I hear you saying is that exploration is important to land at a good place.
Yep.
So one more thing, and then I want you to address that. Is it possible to go to commitment too soon?
Oh, yeah. So if you think about, if we frame this up, Matt, and say that a healthy identity is one that has both the exploration and then somebody's committed to it, there are some other options, okay? There are people for whom they feel like they're frantically exploring, but they can't find the ground. And we call that identity crisis, okay? And that is when I try this, and I try this, and I try this, and
I'm going to buy this, I'm going to purchase that.
Yeah, and I'm going to try this group of friends and that group of friends, and I don't know where I fit, and so they kind of sometimes make impulsive decisions or feel. But you brought up this condition of, can somebody commit too soon? And the answer is yes. Sometimes people grab an identity or an identity is handed to them, so they commit very quickly, oftentimes before full understanding or exploration. And that's called foreclosed identity. That's when somebody, in some ways, is like, I am who they say I am. And so that can be, for example, early on, it can actually feel safer for people because it's like, okay, as long as I do what this group of friends does, or this group, or even a church group
because
does.
They have the belonging and the purpose.
Exactly.
Comes by way of that commitment.
It comes very rapidly that, okay, I know who I am and what I'm supposed to do. Okay? What happens, however, is that in foreclosure, an individual has not necessarily gone through the process of sorting out their own set of beliefs, okay? Now, I'm not trying to say that all beliefs are equal out there. The Bible tells us and helps us sort that out. But even as you and I have raised children or raising children, we raise them up to know the Lord and to follow His ways. But at some point, and definitely points, they have to own those beliefs themselves. They have to come to say, this is what mom and dad believed. This is also what I believe. Here's the thing. You can't hand somebody an identity that is theirs, okay? You can hand them a foreclosed identity. You can push them out of the nest and into exploration that they can do. But the best place for them is to have the counsel and the encouragement, but also just the loving and holding environment, we call it, that allows them to explore and to own their own beliefs.
See, now you've just commissioned us, Ted, with a larger scope here, and that is what we do is we provide the environment whereby people can explore,
Yeah.
so they can get to that good, committed end.
That's right. that's the beautiful thing about a church family and an intergenerational body of believers, because you have the old and the young, you have the Sunday school teachers and the preachers, you've got the men and the women, you've got all these different things. We have to allow ourselves to trust this overall process of growth that we're in, because so many times, just think about how your identity has been shaped by things that you didn't want to go through, okay? Think about how many times your identity's been shaped by people that you didn't know were going to shape it.
For sure. We've talked about identity being the sense of belonging,
Yes.
purpose,
Yeah.
grounding, and I'm going to add another one, worth, I think. I think that's another word here, worth.
Sure.
Now, the way that those terms come to settle upon us is somewhat constructed by our culture, okay?
Sure.
So let me just, and I want you to speak to this. What one person 200 years ago was affirmed in their belonging, purpose, worth, the mechanism for that to happen is different than perhaps what it is today.
Of course.
And that's just part of this beast, right? It's part of this animal.
Yes.
I want you to speak to, what does it look like today? Do you understand what I'm even asking?
Well, I'm going to try. I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that in each generation, there are different things that tends to be pronounced in terms of how people figure out what's important and not. Individuality, okay? That's a big one right now, individuality. Or another one being my ability to be unique, okay? So when we start having this, it's fascinating because I just want to say it this way. I think that each of these things you will find that there's probably a truth and an error in these kind of things that can be used so wonderfully by God, but also corrupted by our adversary, Satan. Because, yes, it is so important. We are created as unique souls, and nobody else has that soul. It's so important to recognize that uniqueness. But when uniqueness becomes my God, okay, all of a sudden, I've exchanged a beautiful aspect of God's creativity for a lie.
Yeah.
Okay? And the problem is, then what starts to happen is people start to strive like this. I have to be the best. I have to be the most of this. I have to be exceptional in this, or who knows in what that is. I mean, it could be in almost anything today.
That part of the identity objective is uniqueness and set apartness. And actually, I think it's really profound. Identity plays on both uniqueness as well as collectiveness.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that's why I think it's so beautiful when we see the truth of that uniqueness, where you see God as a shepherd, really shepherding an individual, but then also shepherding a flock, okay, and a society and a world, right? So you see that kind of the corporateness and the individual.
But what I hear you saying is right now we're definitely on a swing, identity-wise, towards individualism. And I totally see that. Working with young people, working with my own children, they have a very tall order at 18 years of age to come to peace with themselves. When uniqueness has got to be a part of that, and they've got to construct it as opposed to allowing a group to influence that. They're in a difficult place. To bring this to a close here, Ted, as we started out, you gave us the different categories that feed into our identity, whether it be demographics, those things like gifts, ethnicity. These are very sacred things, right? So we can see here that identity plays on very, very charged aspects of our life. Right?
Sure.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
That's why this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's why this is a topic that we do need to steward, because it's like it's very fueled within us.
Well, I think another part to that is people invest more in different parts of their identity. Okay? And so what ends up happening is, whether we're talking about skin color or education or money or whatever kind of things, if that is really, really core to who I am, it is going to feel more and more sacred. Therefore, the more you don't affirm it, or the more that you're different from it, the more threatened I am by you. If we take an aspect of identity as being like, let's say, how handy we are, around the house, and I'm pretty low on that, Matt. I'm on the low side of that. So, but here's the thing: I also have come to terms with that, because God's given me other things to focus on and talents to use, and so I can say, hey, you know what? I'm not really good at that, and it doesn't feel like a bad thing that I have to be defensive about.
You don't lose your sense of purpose.
Right.
You don't lose your sense of belonging, right?
Right.
Those are the core things.
Yes. So what ends up happening, though, is if I was really key on that, to be known as somebody who was really handy, and then you out-handied me,
Yeah.
or if you performed what I could do, then all of a sudden that can wound me, right? Then I can, he's better than I am, and I don't, And so it's interesting, the relative space of those things and how they play.
And this matters. Yeah. Let's close with, we mentioned Christ-centered identity, right, at the outset, that it is critical to everything. But this conversation, I wanted to talk about identity apart from Christ-centered identity, because it's important, right, in all of these areas. But I would love you to bring this Christ-centered identity. Now what place does it play in all of these others?
I just say it this way: a twofold aspect of Christ-centered identity. Number one is, for the believer, I think it's important that no aspect is higher than our identity in Christ. I think that's one of the ways that if my identity as psychologist, or my identity as a father, or as my identity is higher than my identity in Christ, then what starts to happen is I'm going to prioritize that aspect of my life over that. When our Christ-centered identity is top, then it puts those other things in the right place, okay? And so actually, I'm able to be the right kind of father, the right kind of husband, the right kind of psychologist. But the other thing is, I do think that Christ-centered identity actually can be the motivation, the power source that then I live out those other areas of my life.
And can I add another word?
Sure.
It almost is the moorings. It's the stability that allows our other identities to swirl and transition and run across people who are better, handier than us.
Yes. Right.
And for us to put that in perspective.
Yeah. Because then, you know what? Then it helps me to see money correctly. It helps me to see my relationships correctly. It helps me to see how much time I should spend in these things. And so what it does is it's the central operating principle that the other ones operate by. You can also see then why somebody's religious and spiritual worldview would have such a profound aspect on identity.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And by Christ's identity, then wonderfully we have belonging, purpose, worth, stability, home. In such a tremendous way that allows us then to go out and be healthy individuals in all these other important areas of our life. So thank you, Ted, for bringing clarity to this, right? Exploration to commitment. There is a formation that identity goes by. We have lots of identities in our lives, and really we are called to steward those important aspects so that we're thinking accurately about ourselves, thinking accurately about others, and ultimately taking Christ's view of us and making that be most important. So anyway, lots to think about. I think I'm going to continue to think about this topic moving forward, but thank you very much. To our listeners, thanks for being along. I am confident that this conversation applies to you in more than one, two, or three ways. So we trust that it will be a blessing to you.